Out of the 40 plus videos that I've made so far for this AmbiLife YouTube channel, this one might just be my favorite. The impromptu presentation you're about to see was recorded by my good friend Dusty Huntamer during the closing ceremony of my biggest art show ever, called Mirror, Mirror, Body and Brain, What Neuroscience is Missing Today. This show exhibited 5 years worth of my ambidextrous work, including educational graphics, original canvases, and photos of my best street art, as well as tons of information from my website, YouTube channel, and my book titled Big 3 MMD, which is about history's ambidextrous and the benefits of mirror movement development. In the book, which has a lot to do with neuroscience and kinesiology, I write a ton about Benjamin Franklin and Leonardo da Vinci, who were both displayed at length in my art exhibit. I talk a lot about the Meech in this video, particularly about how their decades-long practice of mirror reading and mirror writing would have made their brains abnormally symmetric, efficient, and capable of doing all the genius things that have made them household names to this very day. In this presentation, I highlight through the art exhibit how neuroscience, kinesiology, and general education is missing the study of MMD, which stands for mirror movement development. I also talk about how MMD relates to symmetry, longevity, memory recollection, playing sports, musical instruments, typing on your computer, general handedness, social and commercial reasons for developing dominance, young kids with misdiagnosis of dyslexia, lefty exclusions from neuroscientific studies, and a number of famous people and polymaths whose talent can be related to their developed handedness, including Mozart, Jimi Hendrix, Paul McCartney, and Thomas Jefferson. As you watch this video, know that the recording begins just a few moments after I already started talking about my desire to educate people on mirror movement development and see them inspired to practice it through my unique coffee shop concept of Theory Cafe. Academic institutions, but anybody can walk into a coffee shop, just like you guys all did here tonight. And so I'm looking to start Theory Cafe, which if you actually go to the website theory.cafe, you would see examples of photos and the concept of what it's all about. Similar to this coffee shop, but imagine like all the tables and the chairs towards the center so that all the wall space is completely free and wall to wall, everything is covered with symmetric art, mirrored text, stuff about all the famous mirror movement development practitioners from history who are featured here as well as contemporarily. And there's a whole bunch of others who aren't even featured in this show who I would feature in there. In fact, there's 90 pieces that are here in this show between this wall right here, the area over there, and back beyond the bathroom. And we ran out of display space. I actually had a whole bunch of other frames that we were hoping to put up here, and we ran out of space. So it was a beautiful problem. So I got in contact with Mark Bell, owner of OB Beans, and we're chatting. And I wanted to hear his experience on starting this coffee shop because he actually owns a number of other ones. And at the end of our conversation, he had said, "Jim, how can I help you out?" Which I thought was a beautiful question. I wasn't even expecting that. It was kind of catching me off guard. And what I wanted to tell him was, "I've got this awesome coffee shop idea. You start coffee shops. You should give me a bunch of money to start my coffee shop." I decided to not say that to him. What I instead said was, I kind of fumbled. I was like, "That's a great question. I don't know. I got to kind of think about it. Let me get back to you." What he had said was, "Well, you're an artist. You should display all of your art in our coffee shop." And I said, "That is awesome. I didn't even think of that. Let's do it." So that's why all of this stuff is here. I basically printed out all the best street art that I've done. I'm an ambidextrous street artist between chalk art and paint pen art. And a lot of which I had done while I was living in Philadelphia. I spent the last 5 years back in Pennsylvania before I moved back here in December. So it's a lot of stuff between really what I did in Philadelphia and elsewhere. While I was in Philadelphia, I worked as a tour guide, which allowed me to become an expert in Benjamin Franklin. Right there. I also worked at the Benjamin Franklin Museum. I could talk for 2 days straight about Benjamin Franklin. I can tell you every reason to this day why he's still a household name. So while we're hanging out, if you happen to get any weird, random, obscure questions about Benjamin Franklin, ask away. Always like hearing those. But that's what this whole piece is really all about. But the show is titled Mirror, Mirror, Body and Brain, What Neuroscience is Missing Today. Not only is neuroscience missing the study of this, but also kinesiology and general education. But it's almost like a sad cycle because those institutions, they may be happy to teach it if they had enough people to study to showcase all the benefits on a larger scale. But we never hear about this stuff because a lot of us, we just go to normal schools where we're never taught to read in mirror direction, throw with your other arm, kick with your other foot, skateboard in the mirror direction, all of that stuff, so we don't know any better, unfortunately. But again, hopefully through my coffee shop and subsequent locations, I can educate more people on all of this, get a whole bunch of people to ultimately practice this and develop it so that science can ultimately have people to study at length to showcase on a large scale all the benefits. So I guess that's kind of it. If anybody's looking for any cool stuff, I've got the book back there, Big 3 MMD, my book, which is the world's first symmetric book written both forwards and backwards in mirror and traditional direction. There's also stickers, there's magnets, there's some koozies, and if you buy a book, you get a t-shirt. You get a t-shirt over there. Books for 17 bucks, and I will ambidextrously sign it. What other author is going to do that? Nobody. Anyway, but they can learn that, I guess. But I know I had at least one question I was going to field. We were at least curious, like, hey, like, what's the general deal behind mirror movement development? You said so eloquently.
Well, actually, we're similar to playing the instruments right now. So I would say when you do, for example, piano, you do, directions.
So, and you do, yeah, so piano's a great example. In fact, I have right here the face of Mozart. Mozart, a lot of his music is composed dominantly for the left hand, but it's also you're using the right. So Mozart is considered ambidextrous, as well as the rest of these people here to a varying degree. But I actually have a piece that's back there where I talk about how the real way to practice mirror movement development when it comes to music like the piano, you would actually learn on a piano that is mirrored. So instead of the keys going from low to high, they would go from low to high in the mirror direction. So you'd learn how to play it in that other direction. Another great example of that is with the computer keyboard. I have a piece over there that I write about how the mirrored keyboard I would consider to be the greatest missing piece of human brain body development that we're missing in the developed world. Thanks to a friend of mine who actually had just recently left, Hunter, I got in contact with a company called Kibio, and I actually got produced a custom-made mirrored keyboard. So when I write my name, J-I-M, Jim, on a traditional keyboard, it's J-I-M, but on the mirror keyboard, it's J-I-M. So theoretically, doing that, even though you're using both hands, you're ultimately developing more of that opposite brain hemisphere because you're doing everything in mirror direction. Dan.
I have two questions that might have longish answers each.
Okay, good.
Do you want to expound on the difference between mixed-handedness and ambidextrousness, right?
Sure.
And what do you focus on more when it comes to mirroredness?
So, a lot of mixed-handed people tend to be considered ambidextrous because a lot of people who are mixed-handed work on developing both hands more than the average right-hand dominant person. The average right-hand dominant person, which is how I always grew up, because of commercial reasons, social reasons, we develop all of our machines and products that are chiral. Chiral means that it's designed to just be in one direction. A can opener is a great example of that. Commercially, you develop them in just one way because if you chose to do it both ways, you're dealing with overhead. You're also dealing with a lot of people that currently aren't even asking for left-handed can openers. So as a result, because of it being a subtle lifestyle thing over time, you end up developing one side more than the other. But mixed-handed people, Jimi Hendrix is a great example what I write about back there. Jimi Hendrix did a lot of stuff between different hands. He would smoke cigarettes with one hand, answer the phone with one hand, throw a ball with the other hand, write with the other hand, etc., etc. Jimi Hendrix preferred playing guitar left-handed, but his dad, who gifted him a guitar, told him that, boy, if I see you playing that guitar left-handed, I'm going to take it away from you because left-handed guitar playing is a sign of the devil.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So Hendrix, he's at home with his dad, and he's having to play it right-handed. When his dad wasn't around, he'd flip the guitar over, and he'd play it lefty. He also played a Stratocaster, which is designed specifically for a right-handed person. So for him to play an upside-down Stratocaster just sounded really weird, which is why his sound was so different. So it's a spectrum of practice, but anyone, regardless of whether they say they're righty-dominant or lefty-dominant or mixed, anyone can choose to practice mirror movement development because even if somebody's mixed, they can say, well, I tend to open the door with my left hand, I can now choose to open it with the right hand. And it's that practice that subtly over time, because every time that your hand does this is the brain hemisphere that fires off. The opposite is true. Every time you go like this hemisphere is what fires off. That blood flow sends oxygen to your brain hemisphere. And then over time, you create the new neurons, the new synapses, the corpus callosum gets thicker, which is the communication bridge between the hemispheres. So perhaps somewhere in there I answered your question.
No, I mean, I just wanted to kind of open the topic. And the second, again, opening of the topic, it's not a specific question. I think that in our society, we tend to correlate handedness a lot with writing. visual and language, right? And actually your gallery display kind of shows that, because if I'm walking here, I'm like, oh, handedness is about, or mirrored handedness is about writing. But there's not a lot here, like, I mean, it'd be super cool if you had like that piano in here that would have both ways.
That would be
there's
cool.
like a little display over there about kicking with your left versus with your right, because a lot of it is kinesthetic, not
Sure.
just visual.
Sure.
And then that makes me also want to know more about, like, does this kind of thing, those of us that are better at language than math, is this going to be easier for us? Like, the part of the brain that processes language, is that the part of the brain that's more involved in mirrored abilities, or something that's really good at sports? Are they going to have like a upper hand? Unintended.
It's a spectrum of practice, it's a spectrum of development, and what I would say is that, like anything, it's not everything. One great example that I don't write about because he never came up with showing to be ambidextrous, and this was so annoying to me because I write about a lot of the most top athletes in the world. They happen to practice versions of this. One glaringly annoying example of that does not come up on here is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's like a completely dominant right-handed dude in like everything. And so you got moments like that where you wonder. He's like the goat, but he doesn't practice this apparently. Now, I've never met him and interviewed him and learned more, but based on everything that I've come to study, it just doesn't pop up. Beautiful problem of that there's so much that I can say on this, which is why I really want to have the coffee shop, because you have so much wall space where all of this can be presented and discussed and displayed in all those pieces. I do have one back there where I write about how MMD is the third pillar of longevity along with nutrition and exercise. You'll see a piece over there that shows people doing different physical motions, yoga, running, swimming, cycling, yoga. In fact, every activity that's associated with longevity happens to be mirror movement development. So walking, running, cycling, hiking, swimming, yoga, all of that, you're working to develop both sides of the body equally. One thing that I do want to mention here, because I'm standing here in front of it, this right here, this is one of my favorite pieces here, Leonardo da Vinci. So these are his dying words. And this is written in how he wrote all of his personal notebooks. Leonardo da Vinci completely lacked a formal education because he was a bastard kid. He was an illegitimate kid. He wasn't permitted to go to school. And similar to Benjamin Franklin, who only ever had 2 years of elementary school because Franklin was the 10th to 17 kids born in Boston. And his family couldn't afford to send them to school more than his 2 years of elementary school. He only went from 10 to 12, and so he completely he lacked a formal education. So both these guys were free to practice their mirror movement over the years, which would have made their brains more symmetric, would have increased their memory recollection, which would have allowed them to learn more details, learn more things, become the polymaths that they were. But Da Vinci right here, he says, I've offended God and mankind because my word did not reach the quality it should have. It's just so cool. It's like Leonardo da Vinci, you're like, dude, you're like the best human here on earth, and you're like, I'm still not good enough. But anyway. And the one big thing that I would encourage people, if they're like, well, hey Jim, where should I start with this? One article that I have on my website, which thankfully, I mean, my book is there, but there's also my blog, which has so much content on it, my YouTube channel, so much content between my Facebook, Instagram. I've produced so much material on all of this. One thing that I encourage people to do is mirror read. Mirror reading, because people can practice yoga, they can walk, maybe they practice throwing with the other arm, kicking with the other foot, or like me, skateboarding, they might practice their other side, they can do that. But 99.99999% of all the reading that you've ever done has been in one traditional direction. So you've never even practiced this. In fact, a lot of adults, they'll see this and they'll immediately say, I can't read that. I can't. That's the incorrect word to use, because I will tell anybody, I'd say, well, what's your physical disability? Because if you can read in the mirror direction, you can learn how to read like this. I would tell anybody, in fact, put me to the test on this. Bring up on your phone, I'd say Google the news, find some article, take a screenshot of it, mirror flip that, and show that to me and say, Jim, how fast can you read this? And you'll see. It's completely learnable, 100%. But you're never encouraged to do it. You're only told it's the wrong direction. Or young kids might instinctively write like this, and then they're labeled with dyslexia. I have a piece over there all about that. Paul McCartney, the very left-handed Beatle, he got in trouble growing up in grade school. He instinctively wrote left-handed in all of his notebooks until teachers were like, you're doing it wrong. You got dyslexia, something's wrong with you, kid. But thankfully, Da Vinci and Franklin, they never had that. They were free to practice it. So, Yeah, mirror read. So I have some shatterproof reading mirrors that are over there as well, which you can put it in your book like a bookmark, and then you just hold that at a 45-degree angle, and then you can actually mirror read any physical book with that. And it's gonna feel really hard because you've never done it before. But it gets easier over time with practice. And then when you go back to read in the traditional direction, you're gonna be way faster at it. It's crazy. And you'll remember more details. Anyway. And now, but I know, I like your questions, but you're a bit of a linguist yourself. Like, how many languages do you speak?
6, and now I learn a little bit of another one.
Okay, and we met because we chatted on this, and that you were actually encouraged to have your brain studied, but then when they learned that you're a lefty, they were like, no, we can't study your brain. In fact, a lot of lefties, they're completely prevented from entering a lot of neurological and neuroscientific studies because their brains are physically different. The average right-handed person only ever uses their right hand, but that lefty, because they're so mixed, their brains are going to be way different. But again, like if we were to encourage and taught this growing up, all questions of handedness, I think, would be completely answered. Most professionals in the neuroscientific world who study handedness and are quote-unquote experts on it, they admit that the amount to what we know with certainty about the origins and the nature of handedness is completely laughable. But if they practice this, it would be completely different. I've gotten in contact with a lot of academics over the years. I've sent them my book or I've emailed them, I'd send them links and stuff, and I normally hear crickets. But again, normal people go in coffee shops. And since I had this exhibit, I've gotten in contact with people, they've reached out to me and they've been like, this is such a cool exhibit, I never knew about this, this makes complete sense. It makes complete common sense, and they're telling me, I'm starting to mirror read now, I'm giving friends left-handed handshakes. I even had this one woman who told me, my husband and I, we went to your show, my husband was completely in love with it, and she said he really wants to buy that clock up there, which that's a completely mirrored clock up there. When you work to learn how to read like that, you're practicing your movement development. And she said that he told her, babe, we gotta start teaching our 14-month-old kid how to become ambidextrous. All this stuff. So we have here in San Diego an up-and-coming Leonardo da Vinci Benjamin Franklin.
What's next for you, Jim?
What's next for Jim? I'm taking a break tomorrow. Who knows when I'm waking up? I can care less when that hour comes about. I'm taking a break. January through March, I'm taking a business incubator class at UCSD to actually put to paper numbers and further details on Theory Cafe so that I can then pitch it to inversionistas, which is the word in Spanish, investors in English. Sometimes, sorry guys, sometimes my brain just immediately goes to Spanish before it goes to English. Yes, inversionistas, investors, because every single day goes by and all I think about is the coffee shop. So everything going towards the coffee shop. Theory Cafe. One thing that I want to have on the ceiling of it, how many of you guys been to Washington, D.C.? One of my favorite memorials there out of so many of them, I've given a few tours there last summer, the Jefferson Memorial. Thomas Jefferson, someone who I write about back there, he ultimately started practicing mirror movement development because of a need for physical rehabilitation. He broke his right wrist while he was over in France, replacing Benjamin Franklin as the ambassador. And so he had to start learning how to write left-handed for rehabilitation purposes. And then he later comes back to Philadelphia. He catches up with Benjamin Franklin. It was before that time that Benjamin Franklin wrote his petition of the left hand, which I have over there, which also I have prints out of that, and I completely neglected to put those out. I have a free copy of that for everybody. Benjamin Franklin, he writes an essay called A Petition of the Left Hand 3 years after he signs the Declaration of Independence, in which he creatively tells educators how both hands are designed for equal use, and we should be teaching kids how to develop them as such. It was ultimately through that he would have inspired Thomas Jefferson to practice ambidexterity for the last 40 years of his life. So at the Jefferson Memorial, if you look at the ceiling, there's a quote of Jefferson's, which there's a whole bunch of quotes all over the Jefferson Memorial that he writes about the human mind, the development of the human mind, the advancement and the progression of the human mind, which is something that physically happens when you work to practice this. And the quote says, I'm butchering it, but he basically says, I've sworn an oath on the altar of God, an internal hatred over any form of tyranny over the mind of man. And if you read that, because it's circular, you actually physically have to turn to the right in order to read it on the ceiling, which most right-handers physically tend to turn to the right. I wouldn't have it on the ceiling mirrored, so you actually have to physically turn to the left while you're reading it. This is going to be all sorts of cool stuff in Theory Cafe. Anyway, thank you guys for coming out. We still have quite a bit more time. There's more wine in the back. And thank you guys. Excited to